And now we are going to go on to teachers and how some of us formed ungodly soul ties very, very young in life. And we are still struggling with those ungodly soul ties, making us to behave in ways that we would not have behaved in if we did not experience what we experienced under the control of our teachers. So one time, after teaching about ungodly soul ties to a small group of Christians in a home, in a town right here in Nairobi, Kenya, a lady came and sat next to me. And I had noticed how animated and involved she had been during the prayers that I always conduct at the end of the teachings. So she came and sat next to me, and then she told me, I forgave 2 of my teachers for the first time this afternoon. And I asked her how young she was when she was mistreated by these teachers. And she told me she was about 7 or 8 years old. Now she's a married woman, has her own children, and yet there was still this wound in her that was never dealt with. She had carried these wounds that had been inflicted on her by her teachers for over 30 years. I'm reminded of the woman who came to Jesus in Luke chapter 13 and verse 11. We are told a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. So in this same way, this woman who was now rejoicing over her deliverance from soul ties had been crippled by a spirit or spirits for over 30 years. And each time she tried to straighten up, like that woman in the story with Jesus, and move on in life, Satan would come back to torment and oppress her. And this came through bitterness. She did not know why she was such a bitter person. And anger and hatred. And she never connected it with what she went through in her younger life. And these spirits entered her when these teachers sinned against this little girl. So she went on to tell me how these teachers had picked on her in class to humiliate, ridicule, and punish her without reason. Whether the teacher had a reason or not, this is how that child saw it, that I'm being punished without a proper reason. So I asked her why a teacher would, without reason, just choose to do these things that she had said that they did to her. And she told me that they had alluded to the fact that she thought she was better than everybody else because she came from a well-off family in the community. So the teacher was jealous of the car that drops her, jealous of how her mother dresses, but took it out on the child. So she told me, I hated school and my life was a living hell. Sometimes the hatred of school has got nothing to do with the fact that I don't like maths or chemistry. It has to do with sometimes the teacher themselves. This lady then went on to show me a faded mark on her leg where she said one teacher hit her with a stick and left a wound. So I asked her why she did not tell her parents. Did you tell your parents? Because I was just indignant. I thought the parent would have gone to school the next day, but instead she hid it. Yeah. And I asked her why. And she told me, I thought my parents would side with the teacher. But that is how a little child thinks. Because my parents were, lakini ulifanya nini? What did you do to anger the teacher like that? You see. So in the Luke passage that we just read, Jesus ended up by telling the synagogue ruler, because the synagogue rulers criticized Jesus for healing this woman because it was a Sabbath. And Jesus said, should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be free on the Sabbath day from what bound her? And I praise God that this woman, whom Satan had kept bound for 30 years, was set free from what bound her. And looking at her face now full of joy, I realized that truly he who the Son sets free is free indeed. Amen. So many children in third world countries grow up fearing authority. And it often starts at home. Punishment for misdemeanor is often dished out very liberally. Very, very liberally. And it is often carried out by parents, by siblings, and even relatives. A relative is coming to stay in the house, but they feel that they have a right to discipline the children in that house. Okay? So I know many of us, we've been disciplined by our aunties, by our uncles. Older siblings discipline the younger ones. So when that child also has a chance, another sibling is born. They will also really discipline that little child that is following them. Okay? So when they start going to school, they often find it quite normal for their teachers to pick up where their parents left off. Yeah. That is why this young little girl could not tell her parents, because she felt that her parents will also discipline her for being disciplined by the teacher. Okay? So while their counterparts in the West, these are now children in the Western world, when the parent disciplines them, they have been taught how to pick up the phone and call 911. Which 911 are you going to call? Your parent himself will tell you, here's the phone, call the 911. Okay? So if a spanking stick were used on many people, kids in the West, they will call a line and say, my parents are abusing me. And the parents risk social workers coming and taking the child away. Okay? So in many third world countries, children are disciplined. And that sometimes that discipline goes towards child abuse, unfortunately. It can border on child abuse. So we need to be very careful as parents, because a child always needs to know why they are being punished. If they don't know why they are being punished, bitterness starts to come up. They must know why they are being punished. And we punish a child for disobedience and not for accidents. If a 2-year-old tries to carry a big mug of tea and it drops, it's too big for them, and they are bringing the tea to you, you see. But they'll be beaten for breaking the cup. And yet to them, they're trying to do something kind for you. And they did not disobey. We discipline children for disobedience. And even that disobedience, they need to know the rules. That I have taught you that you don't do this. If you do it, you're going to get punished. But many of us, we punish children for an accident. Yet even us as adults, we also have accidents that happen because we took it on something that was too big for us. And there was an accident. So children have got very, very sensitive spirits, and we need to let them know the reason why we are punishing them, and that the punishment is out of love. We don't want them to continue in that way, because one day they will leave our home and people will reject them for being that kind of a person. Okay? So it is unfortunate, and an unfortunate thing when a child is punished for not understanding a math problem. How do we punish a child because they couldn't understand the math problem? So they are punished, and then they will not understand it even more. Because now each time you tell them 2 + 2, 3, 4. They can't think. You see, you're like, 2 plus, look at me, 2. How many? 5. Because they are thinking of how they are going to be punished if they get it wrong. Isn't it? So a lot of children have grown up hating and holding grudges against teachers who they feel punish them unjustly. So before we veer off to the topic of education, let me come back to soul ties. Okay? So let me emphasize here that a lot of children, especially in the third world countries, end up at the mercy of teachers. And why do the teachers punish these children? Because they are teachers who are overworked and underpaid. Overworked and underpaid. Some are expected to teach a class of 50 children. And unfortunately, many of these teachers have vented out their frustration and their anger on the children. Because why? Because these children are helpless and cannot defend themselves. I'm going to read us a story about Julius, not his real name. Julius brought up the subject of teachers when I was counseling him. He, like the woman in the session that I held in Nairobi, was also mistreated at the hands of a teacher that he had when he was 9 years old. The only difference is that while the woman I have talked about carried a grudge for 30 years, this man was now 65. And as you can imagine, his childhood teacher was probably already dead. However, 56 years later, this man was still having disturbing dreams about his teacher chasing him around with a stick and hitting him at the age of 66. So he told me that whenever he has woken up from such a dream, there would be tears that were rolling down his cheeks. This is a 65-year-old man. So for a good number of people, their misery in life has been because a certain teacher mistreated them, and at the subconscious level, they are still dealing with some unexplained pain because they cannot connect their present pain with their teacher, you see. So my advice to parents is that they should not allow a teacher to oppress their child. Talk to your children and let your child know that anytime somebody does something to them, they are free to come and tell you, and not to think you will also punish them for being punished by the teacher. So talk to your children and ask them about their teachers and evaluate with them whether there is a kind of oppression being carried out against them. And if you're a teacher, you have one of the most important professions in the universe. Because every human being who has ended up being useful to society in any way has passed through the hands of a teacher. Yes. Whether they are doctors, whether they are engineers, whether they are lawyers, whether they are carpenters, somebody has taught them. And that person is a teacher. Okay? So see your profession as an opportunity to mold a future generation. And let the children carry your memory with gratefulness and pride. Let them carry your memory one day. When they think back to the teacher I had in class 3, she was such a wonderful teacher. He was such a wonderful teacher. He's the one who taught me this. And not with bitterness. So Satan takes advantage of bad relationships between teachers and children to forge ungodly soul ties. And later on, these adults who carry these emotional burdens cannot move on to reach their full potential as God intended it to be. And you might find that some of these adults cannot keep a job. Why? Because of an anger problem. And that anger problem started in class. So the boss might do something that reminds them of the teacher that oppressed them. And the suppressed anger wells up and they have a showdown with their boss. But who they're really having a showdown with is the teacher. So if you have a grudge against a school teacher, you might find out that you are not able to have a good relationship with anybody that has any resemblance to that teacher.